By 1910, much had changed for the Cunard line over the preceding years, because at the end of 1907, they commissioned and began servicing the Lusitania and Mauretania. The company's financial position had greatly increased, even considering that they had to pay back a subsidy since the government paid for the construction of Lusitania and Mauretania, but Cunard was aware that from the start they would need a third ocean liner to complete a proper trio of a weekly service. By 1910, Cunard was in a position where they could fund for the construction of a third large, elegant ocean liner to match Lusitania and Mauretania without asking the government for a subsidy, which, following some of the terms with the Lusitania and Mauretania subsidy, Cunard did not want to request another subsidy in the near future. Besides Cunard's financial position in 1910, they also had to observe new competition that was coming onto the field. The Germans had recently announced for the Hamburg America line what would become the Imperator-class ocean liners, which would be a trio of 50,000-ton ships. Those vessels were still very early in their development and were not quite yet a competition, but something Cunard had to keep in mind. The more relevant competition would be the two Olympic-class ocean liners that were nearing completion for the White Star Line, these being Olympic and Titanic. These two vessels were 45,000 tons, which was about a 50% displacement increase when compared to Lusitania or Mauretania. There were a few basic requirements Cunard had when looking into designs for the third ship, and these revolved around experience gained with Lusitania and Mauretania over the preceding 3 years. Firstly, they clearly wanted a ship that matched Lusitania and Mauretania in size and elegance, and even surpassed them. They wanted a ship powered completely by turbine machinery, just like Lusitania and Mauretania. They wanted a surface speed of 23 knots, which would guarantee a voyage of 5.5 days. This would allow the ship to be fast, while also allowing it to have a relatively paced turnover time between New York and Liverpool, so that docking crews were not rushing to get the ship back out on its 3-week schedule. The final requirement was that proposed designs had to be suitable for docking facilities located in Liverpool, which had an entrance width of 90 feet maximum. As a result of this limitation, early preliminary designs for the third ship were based largely off the Mauretania's design, though some of the ships were slightly smaller and some of them were slightly larger, but in general, the designs were in the same ballpark as Mauretania's size. Design 1 called for a ship with an overall length of 775 feet, with a maximum beam of 91 feet and a depth of 62 feet, which made the ship slightly shorter than Mauretania, but slightly wider than Mauretania. Design 2 called for a ship that was identical in size to Mauretania, but had rearranged accommodations. Design 3 called for a ship that was similar to Mauretania's size, with the exception being that it had an additional passenger deck, which meant that the boilers had to be smaller in diameter, but they were increased in number in order to keep the 23-knot maximum speed. Design 4 was identical to Design 3, except it used the exact same boilers and arrangement that was aboard Mauretania. Design 5 was identical to Mauretania, except in the machinery spaces, where in Mauretania there were 4 boiler rooms servicing 4 funnels. In Design 5, there would be 3 boiler rooms servicing a 3-funnel design. Ultimately, this was a decrease in water compartmentalization, which meant a decrease in overall safety. Design 6 was identical to that of Design 2, except it was further rearranged when compared to Design 2. Finally, Design 7 called for the smallest ship to be proposed, with an overall length of 760 feet and a width of 92 feet, but it had an additional deck when compared to Mauretania. What's clear between these 7 designs is that Cunard was attempting to order a ship that was similar in size and displacement to Lusitania and Mauretania, but had better and more plentiful passenger accommodations, whether this be by increasing the ship's beam or by adding an additional deck. All 7 of these designs were presented to Cunard on the 17th of March, 1910. and a couple of months after these designs were submitted, Cunard received information that the Mersey Docks and Harbour Board ordered the construction of a new dock at Liverpool that would have an overall length of 1,000 feet and an entrance width of 120 feet. This meant Cunard could now look at ships that exceeded the size of Lusitania and Mauretania. Much is not known about the creation of the ship's final design, but what is known is that Cunard started with a design that had an overall length of 885 feet and a maximum beam of 95 feet, and based off these parameters, a series of wooden model mock-ups would be constructed and tested in water basins in order to get an idea for the ship's hydrodynamic and aerodynamic qualities, along with its stability qualities. Following those tests, the final design was created, calling for a ship with an overall length of 901 feet 6 inches, a beam of 97 feet, a depth of 64 feet 6 inches, a draft of 36 feet, and a displacement of 53,000 tons. In order to reach a maximum speed of 23 knots, a total of 21 double-ended boilers would be installed, providing steam for 4 steam turbines, 2 high pressure and 2 low pressure, producing 60,000 shaft horsepower. The ship would be capable of carrying a total number of 4,202 passengers and crew at any given time. The water tank test also showed that the final design would have a metacentric height of 4 feet, which was satisfactory for a vessel completed for this type of service. However, Cunard opted to further improve the ship's stability and comfort by installing Fromm anti-rolling tanks instead of bilge keels, which reduced the ship's rolling by roughly 60%. The Fromm anti-rolling tank was not a new concept to Cunard, as they had already installed it aboard the Laconia with satisfactory results. Now they were going to enlarge it and install it between boiler rooms 2 and 3 of the new ship and give it a maximum load of 410 tons of water, which created a depth of 11 feet 6 inches. In October of 1910, Cunard, having been satisfied with the design, set out tenders for construction, and on the 6th of December 1910, a tender from the John Brown shipyard was received with a price of £1.4 million. 6 days later, on the 12th of December, Cunard accepted John Brown's tender, and they received the contract for construction. On the 19th of January 1911, Cunard decided that the ship's new name would be Aquitania, and on the 31st of January 1911, the contract for construction between Cunard and John Brown was officially signed. On the 4th of June 1911, hull number 409, preemptively named Aquitania, was laid down on the number 4 building way at the John Brown shipyard. On the 21st of April 1913, with a crowd numbering over 100,000 spectators, the Aquitania's hull was launched and moved into the fitting-out basin. On the 10th of May 1914, Aquitania departed the John Brown shipyard for the first time under its own power and began conducting sea trials. 8 days later, on the 18th of May 1914, Aquitania was formally accepted by the Cunard Line for operational service. The ship was finally completed. Little did Cunard know at the time, Aquitania would go on to be one of the most influential ocean liners ever constructed, and it is a contender for the greatest ocean liner ever built. Its overall design, service, and history is largely uncontested by any other ocean liner. Aquitania was designed at the height of the Edwardian era of ocean liners, but it ultimately broke away from many of the standard design choices that we would see other vessels of its time period take on, including the Lusitania, Olympic, or Imperator. This would allow the ship to remain relevant throughout its entire lifetime, which ended in 1950. It outlived every other 4-stacker ocean liner Britain constructed by more than a decade. With that having been said, there's nothing more I wish to add on to this topic for today. So, if you have learned something new in this video, why not leave a like and a comment down below, and have a wonderful day.